That poor deacon was, of course, trying to give biblical counsel and comfort. Because the Bible does, after all, teach us that to be absent from the body is to be at home with the Lord. This is certainly what a young missionary friend of mine had in mind when he commented recently that he'd never thought much about cemeteries because the soul, after all, leaves the body upon death. But that's not the entirety of our hope. As wonderful as it is to imagine that to be absent from the body is to be present with our Lord, that's an intermediate hope. That does not express the hope that we have for the redemption of all of creation, including our bodies. And so my friend who hadn't ever thought much about cemeteries was expressing the yearning for that greater hope when he confessed that the recent tragic death of a friend of his had caused him to reconsider this neglect that he had formerly given to funerals and cemeteries and what we do with the dead. The confusion that Plato brought up on us and that we bring on ourselves continually goes all the way back to the very beginning of the church, which is why Paul had to attack it head on in his first letter to the Corinthians. The verses that Jordan read for us today come at the very end of Paul's magisterial defense of the necessity of Christ's resurrection and of our own. He is summing up his argument here. The dead shall be raised incorruptible. Our physical bodies will be transformed. They will be clothed in immortality. This is the outcome of Christ's victory over death. Death itself will finally be destroyed, and it will have no more hold on us, including our bodies. Paul well knew that this assertion would boggle the imagination. We've seen dead bodies. We know that they decay and disintegrate. Is it really good news to think that we will one day re-inhabit our bodies? But Paul dismisses this kind of objection as too narrow-minded, drawing an illustration from nature earlier on in the same chapter. He says, "What you sow does not come to life unless it dies. And what you sow is not the body that is to be, but a bare kernel, perhaps of wheat or of some other grain. But God gives it a body he has chosen, and to each kind of seed its own body. So it is with the resurrection of the dead. What is sown is perishable, what is raised is imperishable. It is sown in dishonor, it is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness, it is raised in power." How much greater is the flower or the tree than the seed from which it grew? How much more magnificent is the butterfly, as we used to have displayed here on the banner during Easter time, than the caterpillar, which is its larval state? This is just a small echo of how much more our resurrection bodies will be from the bodies we know now. They will still be our bodies, to be sure. They will be recognizably us, just as Jesus' friends were able to know that it was him after the resurrection, although admittedly not always at first glance. We will be able to recognize each other in our resurrected bodies. But our bodies will not only be restored, they will be fully healed, and more than that, they will be glorified. They will finally be everything God meant for them to be before sin entered the picture and brought with it death and destruction. This, my friends, is good news for people with bodies. We who have sinned and suffered in our bodies might easily wish, like some of the Corinthians, like my buddy Plato, to be rid of them in the end. A resurrection body? No thanks. My body reminds me too much of the limits and the liabilities of being human. A person who suffers chronic pain in his body, or an abuse victim who has experienced her body as a site of shame, might well imagine that a great good future would exist without the encumbrance of physical existence. But God's plan for redemption is far greater than our limited imaginations. He does not abandon our bodies. He will make them whole and glorious. What is sown is perishable. What is raised is imperishable. It is sown in dishonor. It is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness. It is raised in power. The hope of bodily resurrection teaches us that our bodies are precious to God Himself. He created us with bodies. He loves our bodies. Though weakened by time, ravaged by disease, or dishonored by sin, dishonored by our own sins and by sins committed against us, our bodies are not disposable. They, which is to say, we, will be fully redeemed. Paul reiterates this as he concludes his argument to the Corinthians. For the perishable body must be clothed in imperishability. The mortal body will be clothed in immortality. When the perishable is clothed in the imperishable, and the mortal clothed in immortality, then shall come to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. We are not left naked, as Paul says in another part of his writings. We will not be disembodied souls, nor will we be left with the same kinds of earthly bodies that are subject to shame and dishonor. We will be clothed in glory, put on the imperishable, put on immortality. This is what the victory that Christ has won over death will look like. Of course, there is still a sting to death. Death has been defeated once and for all by Jesus rising from the dead. But death is also the last enemy that will be destroyed. We will not experience the fullness of this freedom from death until God sets everything right. So in the meantime, we grieve when we lose someone, as is appropriate. As Jesus wept at the grave of his friend Lazarus, it is good and right that we experience and honor those we love who are separated from us when they die. But it is true that the last enemy to be defeated will be death. That victory that is already won will be fully realized when we all together inhabit our resurrected bodies that are beyond anything we can imagine in the bodies we have now. This is the great hope that we have given to us by Jesus Christ. Thanks be to God.